Steve Harvey was left completely speechless when a single mother revealed her son had passed away. What he did next moved millions to tears and changed lives forever. In a world of scripted reality TV, this raw moment of genuine humanity broke through the entertainment facade and touched hearts worldwide. This brave mother, carrying unimaginable grief, stepped onto that stage never expecting what would follow. Harvey's response wasn't just unexpected. It was a split-second decision that would ripple across continents and inspire countless acts of kindness. What happened when the cameras captured this unscripted collision of tragedy and compassion? The world would never forget. The lights of the studio beamed down as Steve Harvey strode onto the stage, his signature smile and charismatic presence immediately commanding the room. This was just another taping day. Another chance for the comedian-turned-host to work his magic, making audiences laugh while changing lives through heartwarming surprises and generous giveaways. The energy was electric, as it always was when Steve took the stage, the crowd erupting into applause that seemed to shake the very foundation of the building. "You know, I've done thousands of these shows," Steve would later confess in a rare moment of vulnerability to his closest friends. "You think you've seen it all, heard every story possible. You develop this sixth sense, this ability to read people and situations before they even unfold." His confidence that day was unwavering, the well-oiled machine of production humming perfectly around him. Producers with headsets darted back and forth, cue cards were prepared, and the audience had been perfectly primed for another unforgettable episode of television magic. But something felt different in the air. Perhaps it was the way the producers whispered backstage, exchanging glances that seemed heavier than usual, or how the audience seemed to hold their collective breath when they announced the next guest. The typical buzz of excitement had transformed into something more reverent, more anticipatory. Whatever it was, even Steve, a man who had interviewed presidents and superstars, who had navigated the most awkward and hilarious of Family Feud responses without missing a beat, felt an unusual tension building in his chest, a premonition that today would not follow the familiar script of entertainment. Then she walked onto the stage, a single mother, modestly dressed in a simple blue blouse that couldn't hide her dignity, with eyes that somehow held both profound sadness and remarkable strength. Her shoulders were squared, carrying an invisible weight that seemed to grow heavier with each step toward the interview chair. Her hands trembled slightly as she took her seat, but her voice was steady when she greeted Steve. The studio lights caught the subtle glint of a small locket around her neck, one she unconsciously touched as she settled in. There was something about her, that made the host lean forward, his usual rapid-fire questions momentarily forgotten, his well-rehearsed charm giving way to genuine curiosity and concern. "My name is Sonia," she began softly, her voice somehow cutting through the cavernous studio with crystal clarity. "And I'm here to share something I've never spoken about on television before." The way she paused after these words sent a ripple through the audience, a collective intuition that what would follow wasn't the typical feel-good story they had come to expect. Even the cameramen, veterans of emotional television moments, seemed to hold their equipment with extra steadiness, sensing the gravity of what was about to unfold. But what Steve didn't know was that this woman's story would leave him completely defenseless for the first time in his career. A man known for his quick wit and faster comebacks, suddenly finding himself without words. The next 5 minutes wouldn't just make for compelling television. They would shatter the barrier between entertainment and raw humanity, between a host and his guest, creating a moment that would be replayed millions of times around the world, and forever change how people viewed the man behind the famous mustache and booming laugh. The studio lights seemed to dim around Sonia as she began to share her story. though no lighting technician had touched the controls. It was as if the universe itself was creating a more intimate space for what was about to be revealed. The usual bustling energy of the studio had transformed into something sacred, a sanctuary for truth that transcended entertainment. "I've been a single mother for most of my adult life," she began, her fingers still absently touching the locket around her neck. A nervous habit that spoke of years of seeking comfort from this small memento. "When my son Marcus was born, his father left us before we even made it home from the hospital. Said he wasn't ready for the responsibility." A familiar story to many, but the way she told it, without bitterness, only a matter-of-fact acceptance, spoke volumes about her character. The resilience etched into every line of her face told of battles fought alone, of midnight worries and solitary strength. Steve nodded encouragingly, his usual comedic interjections nowhere to be found. Something in her tone told him this wasn't the time for levity. His famous intuition, honed through decades of reading people across the table, signaled that this moment required something different from him. Not the entertainer, but the human being who had known his own struggles. "We didn't have much, but we had each other," Sonia continued, a small smile briefly illuminating her face, like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. "Our apartment was tiny, just one bedroom that I gave to Marcus while I slept on a pull-out couch in the living room. But that boy never once complained." Her eyes took on a distant look, seeing not the studio but memories projected on the canvas of her mind. Marcus was the kind of child who could find joy in anything. He'd make toys out of cardboard boxes, create entire worlds with just his imagination. One Christmas, when I couldn't afford presents, he drew me a picture of us in front of a mansion and said, "Someday, Mom, I promise." The audience murmured appreciatively, many nodding in recognition of childhood creativity and the universal language of a mother's sacrifice. Several were already dabbing at their eyes, sensing that this story wasn't heading toward the uplifting conclusion they hoped for. As she spoke about her son's early years, his first steps taken toward a second-hand crib, his love of dinosaurs that led him to memorize facts from library books, his talent for drawing that had his elementary school teachers suggesting art scholarships for the future. The tremor in her voice became more pronounced. The timeline of her story was moving forward, approaching something that made her breathing quicken and her hands clasped together more tightly, knuckles whitening under the studio lights. By the time he was 7, Marcus was the man of the house, she said with a mother's pride that transcended their circumstances. He'd tell me not to worry when bills came, that he would take care of me when he grew up. He'd leave little notes in my purse before I'd go to my night shift. "You're the best mom in the universe," or "I'm proud of you." Her voice cracked slightly, the memory clearly as painful as it was precious. He was saving his allowance to buy me a real diamond ring someday. $5 he earned from the neighbor for pulling weeds, and he put 4 of them in a jar labeled Mom's Ring. A camera panned across the audience, capturing the emotional impact of her words. Tissues were emerging from purses, and even the typically stoic cameramen seemed affected, their movements more deliberate, more respectful. Steve leaned forward, his famous empathy evident in every line of his face. The audience had gone completely silent now, sensing the approaching storm in her narrative. Even the production assistants stood motionless in the wings, scripts forgotten in their hands. "When Marcus turned 9, Sonia continued, pausing to take a deep breath that seemed to pull from the depths of her soul, "he started getting headaches. Bad ones. The kind that would wake him up crying in the middle of the night." The studio seemed to hold its collective breath. "I gave him children's Tylenol and cool washcloths. I thought it was just stress, We'd been evicted again, and I was working 3 jobs. We'd moved schools twice that year, and he was having trouble making new friends. Her voice faltered for the first time, guilt threading through her words. I thought he was just worried about me, about our situation. I told him everything would be okay if we just held on a little longer. The locket between her fingers opened now with a tiny click that seemed to echo in the silent studio, and she glanced down at it briefly, drawing strength from whatever image it contained. By the time we got to a doctor who would see us without insurance, the tumor was already the size of a golf ball. Growing in his beautiful brain, the doctor said. Probably for months while I was... She swallowed hard. While I was telling him it was nothing to worry about. A soft gasp rippled through the audience, the collective sound of hearts breaking in unison. Steve's usual animated expression had frozen, his eyes never leaving Sonia's face. The consummate professional was visibly fighting to maintain his composure, his own eyes glistening under the harsh lights. "We fought for 14 months, she said. Each word now weighted with visible effort, as if the syllables themselves were stones she had to push uphill. Radiation, chemotherapy, experimental treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. So I sold our car, worked overnight shifts, started a GoFundMe that barely made a dent. Her hands trembled, but her spine remained straight, a posture that spoke of a woman who had learned to carry impossible weights. Marcus never complained, not once. Even when the chemo made him so sick he couldn't stand, he'd ask the nurses if I'd eaten, if I'd slept. On his worst days, when he couldn't keep even water down, he'd make jokes to try to make me smile. Tears were flowing freely down her face now, but her voice remained remarkably steady, a testament to how many times she had told this story to herself in empty rooms, to therapists, to support groups, to the night sky. The hospital staff said they'd never seen such a brave child. When his hair fell out, he said he was just trying to look like his favorite action hero. When he lost so much weight, his clothes hung off him. He said he was just making room for more ice cream when he got better. A camera caught Steve wiping quickly at his eye, his normal jovial mask completely abandoned now. This wasn't television anymore. This was witnessing. The last thing he said to me was, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll still take care of you." She opened the locket fully now, turning it toward Steve. He passed away holding my hand 3 years ago yesterday. He was 10 years, 4 months, and 16 days old. The studio fell silent. Not the manufactured silence of television production, but the genuine, devastating silence that follows the revelation of a wound so deep it commands reverence. A silence that acknowledged there were no words adequate for such loss, no platitudes that could possibly comfort. Steve Harvey, a man who had built a career on having the perfect response to every situation, stared at the small photo in the locket. A smiling boy with his mother's eyes and a gap-toothed grin. For perhaps the first time in his professional life, he was completely, utterly speechless. The cameras captured his face in real time as it cycled through emotions. Shock, heartbreak, empathy, and something deeper, a recognition that transcended the performer-audience relationship. In that moment, he wasn't Steve Harvey, the celebrity. He was simply a human being confronted with another human's unbearable pain. The studio audience, the production team, the millions who would eventually watch this footage, all held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The studio fell silent, but it was Steve's reaction that would stun millions around the world. The silence that enveloped the studio was broken only by the soft sound of Steve Harvey removing his microphone and placing it on the small table between them. This unscripted action, a breach of television protocol, sent a ripple of surprise through the production team. The director's voice crackled urgently in the floor manager's earpiece, but no one moved to intervene. Steve rose from his chair, a move that would normally signal a commercial break. But instead, he did something unprecedented in his decades-long career. He walked around the table and knelt beside Sonia's chair, taking both her hands in his. "I need a minute," he said, not to Sonia, but to the cameras, to the audience, to the millions who would eventually witness this moment. His voice was different. Stripped of its performative polish, raw with emotion. "Just give me a minute." The floor director frantically signaled for a commercial break, but Steve shook his head firmly. "Keep rolling," he commanded, his authoritative tone leaving no room for argument. "This needs to be seen." He turned back to Sonia, who looked as surprised as everyone else by this deviation from the show's format. The consummate professional had vanished, replaced by something far more authentic. "Marcus," Steve said softly, the name emerging with unexpected reverence. "Your son's name was Marcus." Sonia nodded, confusion mingling with her grief. "I never told this story on television," Steve continued, his voice barely audible now, forcing everyone to lean in. "Never found the right moment, I guess. Or maybe I just wasn't brave enough." The audience was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming through the vast studio space. "When I was struggling, before any of this success," he gestured vaguely at the studio around them, "I was homeless, living in my car, showering at gas stations, wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life trying to be a comedian." This wasn't news to many fans who knew parts of his rags-to-riches story, but the raw vulnerability in his delivery made it feel like a first-time confession. "One night in Chicago, middle of winter, my car wouldn't start. I was parked behind a restaurant, hoping they wouldn't call the cops on me. It was maybe 10 degrees out, and I just knew, I might not make it through the night." Sonia's hands tightened around his, their roles suddenly reversed. She was now offering comfort to him. A boy came out the back door of that restaurant, couldn't have been more than 10 years old. Son of the owner, I found out later. He had a container of food and a blanket. Said his mom told him to bring it to me. Steve's voice broke slightly. But I knew. Kids don't think of things like that on their own. That boy saw me from the window and made his mom help. Steve paused, composing himself with visible effort. That boy's name was Marcus, too. A collective gasp swept through the studio. Sonia's eyes widened. "Different Marcus, different time, different place," Steve clarified quickly. "But when you showed me that picture in your locket, I saw the same eyes, the same kindness, and it hit me. I made it through that night because of a child's compassion. I'm sitting here today with all this success because a boy named Marcus decided I was worth saving." He stood up slowly, his knees cracking audibly in the silence, but he didn't return to his host chair. Instead, he remained standing beside Sonia. "Your Marcus was right," Steve said, his voice gaining strength. "He is still taking care of you. And now, if you'll allow it, I'd like to help him keep that promise." The cameras zoomed in on Sonia's face, capturing the moment of bewilderment that slowly transformed into something like hope. The first glimmer she'd shown since beginning her story. "We're going to take a break," Steve finally said to the camera, his professional demeanor returning slightly. "But when we come back, Sonia and I have something important to discuss. Something that I think Marcus would approve of." As the on-air lights dimmed, signaling the commercial break, The audience erupted into emotional applause. Crew members wiped tears from their eyes. The director, initially furious at the protocol breach, sat back in his chair, understanding that he had just witnessed something more valuable than a perfectly executed television segment. What happened next would transform not only Sonia's life, but would redefine Steve Harvey's legacy forever. When the cameras began rolling again, the studio had transformed. The audience, who had spent the commercial break in hushed, emotional conversations, fell silent as Steve and Sonia returned to their seats. But something fundamental had shifted in the atmosphere. This was no longer just a talk show segment. It had become a moment of collective witnessing. Steve had composed himself during the break, but the polished veneer of the professional host had been permanently altered. His famous smile returned, but it carried new depth. The smile of a man who had made a decision that transcended entertainment. "Welcome back, everyone," he began, his voice resonant with purpose. "Before the break, I shared something very personal with Sonia and with all of you. Sometimes in life, we're given opportunities to connect the dots, to see how our past experiences prepare us for present moments of meaning." The camera panned to Sonia, who had also used the break to collect herself. Her eyes were still red-rimmed, but there was a new alertness in her posture, a cautious curiosity about what would happen next. "Sonia," Steve continued, turning to face her directly, "you came here today to share Marcus's story. But I believe there's more to it than that. I believe your son led you here for a reason." She nodded slowly. "I've been trying to find purpose since losing him," she admitted. "Some days just getting out of bed feels impossible. But I keep hearing his voice telling me to keep going." "During our break, I made some calls," Steve said, an uncharacteristic nervousness evident in how he straightened his tie. "And I want to tell you about something I started a few years ago but never spoke about publicly." The audience leaned forward collectively, sensing the importance of what was coming. "After I achieved success, I kept thinking about that night in Chicago, about that young boy named Marcus who showed me kindness when I needed it most. I wanted to honor that moment somehow." Steve cleared his throat. "So I quietly established a foundation called Marcus's Promise. It provides medical assistance, housing, and educational support to single parents with critically ill children." Sonia's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening. "We've helped over 200 families so far," Steve continued. "But we've been operating under the radar. No publicity, no fundraising galas, just quiet work helping families who are facing the unimaginable, just like you did." The camera caught tears forming again in Sonia's eyes, but these were different from before. Tears of astonishment rather than grief. "What I never had," Steve said, his voice gaining momentum, "was a face, a story, a purpose that could bring this work into the light where it could help more families. The foundation needs someone who understands both the pain and the purpose. Someone who can speak to parents facing the darkest moments of their lives." Understanding began to dawn on Sonia's face. "Sonia, I'd like to offer you a position as the executive director of Marcus's Promise Foundation. Full salary, benefits, and a platform to ensure that no parent faces what you faced alone. Your Marcus and my Marcus, two boys who never met, but who both changed lives through compassion, bringing their legacies together." The audience gasped, then erupted into applause that seemed to shake the studio walls. Several people were openly sobbing. Even the cameramen were visibly moved, their usually steady hands trembling slightly as they captured this moment. Sonia sat frozen, disbelief written across her features. I don't have the qualifications, she stammered. I was a waitress before Marcus got sick, and after, I've barely been functioning. Steve leaned forward, his expression serious. The only qualification needed is the one you've already earned through the hardest possible path. You know what these families need because you've walked their journey. Everything else, we can teach you. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. This contains the details of the position, along with something else. He handed it to her with reverence. Go ahead. Open it. With trembling fingers, Sonia opened the envelope. Inside was an employment contract, but beneath it was a photograph that made her gasp audibly. A professional portrait of a smiling boy, gap-toothed and bright-eyed. That's, she began, unable to complete the sentence. The Marcus who helped me that night in Chicago, Steve confirmed. I tracked him down years ago. He's a doctor now, working in pediatric oncology. When I called him during our break and told him about your Marcus, about this moment, he asked if he could be involved. He wants to serve as the medical director for the Foundation's new initiative, a program to ensure that no child goes without proper medical screening due to lack of insurance or resources. The camera zoomed in on Sonia's hands, holding the two images side by side, her Marcus in the locket and this other Marcus in the photograph. Two boys connected across time and circumstance by the same compassionate spirit. One more thing, Steve said, his voice dropping to an intimate register that nonetheless carried throughout the silent studio. The Foundation has been operating out of a small office in Chicago. But as part of this expansion, we've purchased a building to serve as our new headquarters. He paused, emotion threatening to overwhelm him again. The address is 1247 Elmwood Avenue. Sonia looked confused for a moment. Then her expression transformed as recognition hit her. That's where Marcus and I lived, our old apartment building. Steve nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When he found his voice again, it carried the weight of destiny fulfilled. The building has been completely renovated. The ground floor will be the Foundation offices. And the top floor, he paused, is a fully furnished apartment for the executive director. Your home, if you choose to accept. The audience was on their feet now, the applause deafening. Producers were openly weeping in the wings. This had transcended television. It had become a moment of collective healing, of purpose found in pain. So, Steve said, extending his hand to Sonia, will you help me keep both of our Marcus's promises? What happened next would be replayed on news outlets around the world, shared millions of times on social media, and studied in television production classes for decades to come. But more importantly, it would spark a movement that would change the landscape of pediatric care in America forever. The applause eventually subsided, but the energy in the studio lingered, a palpable mix of hope, relief, and the kind of joy that only comes from turning a page in a life story. Sonia sat at the edge of her seat, still processing everything that had just happened. The weight of the moment settled over her like a soft, comforting blanket, wrapping her in a sense of purpose she had thought long lost. As the cameras continued to roll and the audience cheered, Steve leaned closer to her, his expression earnest. I know this is a lot to take in, Sonia, but I want you to know that this is just the beginning. For you, for Marcus's promise, and for all the families who will benefit from the work we do together. Sonia nodded slowly, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. I never imagined I would be in a position to help others like this. After everything that happened, I thought I would just fade into the background, you know? Just try to survive day by day. You're not fading into the background. You're stepping into the spotlight, Steve affirmed. And it's time to share your story, not just with this audience, but with the world. With that, Steve turned to face the camera again, his charismatic energy returning. Folks, you just witnessed something extraordinary. This is what the power of love and compassion can do. If you want to support Sonia and the Marcus's Promise Foundation, I encourage you to visit the website and see how you can help. Every donation will go directly to families in need, just like Sonia and Marcus. The audience erupted into applause once more, this time fueled by the collective desire to contribute, to be part of something bigger than themselves. This was no longer just a segment on a talk show. It was a movement waiting to unfold. As the segment wrapped up, Steve leaned in again, lowering his voice. I want to meet with you after the show, Sonia. We need to discuss what comes next, how to launch this initiative, and get you the support you need to make it a success. Sonia couldn't contain her smile, a genuine lightness beginning to fill the space that grief had occupied for so long. Thank you, Steve, for everything. The show concluded, and the audience began to disperse, but many stayed behind, eager to speak with Sonia, to express their admiration and support. She was enveloped in a sea of kind words, hugs, and shared stories of loss and resilience. Your story touched me deeply, one woman said, tears in her eyes. I lost my son last year, and I've been struggling to find my way since. Thank you for sharing. You've inspired me to keep going. Sonia felt a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time, she realized that her experience, as painful as it had been, could be a beacon of hope for others. Each shared story was a thread, weaving a tapestry of collective healing. As the crowd began to thin, Steve approached her again, a serious look on his face. Sonia, let's take a moment to talk logistics. We need to set up a meeting with the board of the foundation, and I want you to meet the team. They're passionate people who have been working tirelessly to make this a reality. Absolutely, Sonia replied, her pulse quickening at the thought of stepping into this new role. I want to be involved in every aspect. I want to make sure we're reaching the families who need us most. That's the spirit, Steve said, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. You're going to be amazing at this. Over the next few weeks, Sonia immersed herself in her new role. The office, located in the building that had once been her home, was filled with light, laughter, and the bustle of dedicated staff members who had the same mission as she did. It was a world away from the isolation and despair she had felt just months before. The foundation quickly gained momentum, with Sonia leading initiatives to provide medical assistance, support groups, and educational resources for single parents navigating the healthcare system. She organized community outreach programs, inviting families to share their stories and connect with one another. The support she received from Steve and the foundation team was overwhelming, as they worked together to secure partnerships with local hospitals, school districts, and other nonprofits. One afternoon, as Sonia sat in her new office sorting through donations, her phone buzzed with a message from Steve. Exciting news! We've just secured funding from a major donor. Meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. Her heart raced at the thought of more resources to help families. She quickly replied, That's fantastic. Thank you for believing in this. The next day, the meeting buzzed with energy. Sonia presented her vision for the foundation, detailing how they could expand their outreach and improve the lives of countless families. The donor, a successful entrepreneur who had faced similar challenges in his own youth, was moved by the passion and clarity of her mission. "I want to help," he said, leaning forward. "Let's make this foundation a national model for how we support families in crisis." As the weeks turned into months, Sonia found herself constantly inspired by the families she met. Their resilience echoed her own. Each success story she heard fueled her determination to help others navigate their darkest moments. She began to envision the foundation not just as a support system, but as a community, an interconnected web of families helping families. One day, as she walked through the office, she was approached by a group of parents whose children had received assistance from the foundation. They wanted to share their stories, to express their gratitude. But more importantly, they wanted to take an active role in the foundation's mission. "We want to help too," one mother said, her voice strong. "We've all been through so much, and together we can make a bigger impact." Sonia felt tears prick at her eyes. "Absolutely. This is your foundation too. Let's work together. What ideas do you have?" As the parents shared their visions for future initiatives, Sonia realized that Marcus's spirit was alive in every single person who stepped through the foundation's doors. His legacy had sparked a movement, and she was merely a vessel, carrying it forward. Months later, on the anniversary of Marcus's passing, Sonia organized a community event to honor his memory. She invited families to gather at the office, to share stories, to remember, and to celebrate the lives of their children. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the gathering, Sonia felt a sense of peace wash over her. Steve arrived, as he always did, offering his support. He spoke to the crowd, sharing how the foundation had grown and how many families had benefited from their work. It was a moment of pride for everyone involved. But for Sonia, it was a moment of profound reflection. As she looked out over the crowd, she saw the faces of parents who had once felt isolated in their grief. Now they stood together, united by shared experiences and a common purpose. The laughter of children danced through the air, a reminder that life, even in its most challenging moments, could be beautiful. Sonia stepped up to the microphone, her heart racing but steady. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice strong despite the emotions swirling within her. "This foundation exists because of the love we all shared for our children. Marcus taught me the power of compassion, and together we can honor that legacy." The crowd erupted in applause, and Sonia felt warmth spread through her chest. She realized that this was not just about her or about Marcus. It was about all of them, about building a community that could uplift one another. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the gathering, Sonia took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her loss shift into something lighter. She had transformed her pain into purpose, and in doing so, had ignited a spark of hope that would continue to shine brightly for families everywhere. This was more than a new beginning. It was a promise fulfilled.